All right. It's about that time. Good morning, everyone. I wanted to thank you guys for carving some time out of your morning to join Larry Cramp and myself and Jeff Koplinski on this 8.7.500 release. So this is the second 8.7 software supplement. Back in the 8.7 release, we gave you a lot of new features, a new utility tab, some new subsystem features, some changes in lighting. We did our internal Bluetooth on the touch panels, our audio player, and in this .500 release, there's some really other cool things happening, especially around surveillance. So we're going to go over some things with a new surveillance solution. Larry's going to go over some new CERs, which are bugs. That's our internal term for bugs in the software. What we fixed, some new driver updates. We're going to touch on a new Panamax piece. We're going to treat these webinars like we normally do it. Larry's going to be presenting. I'll chime in. We'll kind of go back and forth. We're going to handle the questions to go in the chat log. So as we're going on through the presentation, if you've got some questions that pop up, go ahead and type them in the chat log. We'll go ahead and see those. At the end of each section, we're going to take a question break. So we've got 3 or 4 sections of this presentation. We'll take breaks. I'll read some of the questions out. We'll answer them, curate the questions and go over them. And then we'll have a big full circle Q&A through the chat at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'll kick it over to Larry.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. As Jeff had mentioned, today we're going to go over the 8.7.500 release. As you know, I am Larry, and with me, as always, is Jeff Koplinski. The agenda today is we're going to go over the SWNVR expansion. We'll cover that in a minute. We're going to go over the new lighting schedule. This has been looked upon for a long time, and it's finally here. We're going to cover some general features and enhancements, new drivers, driver updates, CERs, and we're going to touch on the new Panamax piece, just because it does relate to our utilities tab as well. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll open it up for some general questions and comments, again, like Jeff said, through the chat. Okay, let's talk about the software NVR expansion. So in 8.7, we released the NVR on the master controller. Now we're calling it the primary controller. And that was 4 channels, right? Well, now we have expanded that up to 36 channels with the use of extenders. So with this 8.7.500 release, you get the same license, SWNVR, and you can apply additional license to an extender, SC100 or 300, that you happen to have on the system. And we support up to 4 plus the master, giving it a 36-channel depth. So 36 channels of recorded NVR footage you can have. And how that looks is kind of like this. So you can buy one NVR license, and you can apply it to the primary controller, which would be 4 channels, or an extender controller, which would be 8 channels. And if you purchase 2 of those licenses, you can apply them to the primary or extender controller as you see fit. So if you had 2 extender controllers, you can apply the license to use both of those for 16 channels, or in the first case, you can apply it to the primary and the extender and get the 12 channels.
So, there is something, if I could chime in here, Larry.
As always.
So the software NVR, guys, this is we're kind of doing this a little bit different than the traditional norm. And Larry, if you could go back a slide. It's important to note with this licensing. So basically, if you have a license, all of these licenses are held on the primary controller. Okay, these software licenses. So if you have 3 software licenses, it's important to know that these are not specifically keyed up to the MAC ID of a controller. And why is this important? So we've got, like Larry said, 8.7 launched, we were doing 4 channels off the primary controller, which required a license. So say we've got a license already purchased in the system, and it's activated on that primary controller, doing 4 cameras. And maybe the client wants to add another 3 cameras. So now, basically, you could still use that same license. If you bought an extender, you could run 8 cameras off that extender, and then you could just move that original license that originally was on the primary controller doing the 4 cameras. Now we can move it over to the extender. So they're not keyed to the MAC IDs of the controllers. however many licenses you have, they're all stored in the primary controller, and they can be used on any NVR solution, whether it be internal or external. Just wanted to hit that home, Larry.
No, thank you, Jeff. Perfect. All right, so just in review, 8 channels can be added to an SC100 or 300 extender. Now that does require the primary controller to be an SC100 or 300. Each of the chassis, the controllers that are doing the NVR must have a USB hard drive or solid state drive connected to it. Just a reminder, the SC100 USB drive can't power some hard drives by itself. You can use a powered USB extender or a solid state drive that it will power. So just keep that in mind. Also to note, the controller that is doing the NVR must be hardwired to the network via the Ethernet jack, not Wi-Fi. You can't send that much data over the Wi-Fi back and forth. So the license for this is the same. So SW-NVR is the same license for either the primary controller or the extender controller. And again, it's 8 additional channels per extender. And again, we support 4 extenders plus the primary, giving us 36 total NVR channels. The OSD is available for all the channels, and that is, you don't need to connect the OSD to each extender. You can connect the OSD to one controller, and then the OSD on that controller can see all the channels available. We'll talk about this in detail in a little bit, but the NVR has been expanded for clip exporting, and you'll see the details of that in a few slides. So the setup, now I'm not going to go over this in detail, but in case you guys review this after the fact, this will be here. But basically, what you want to do is purchase and install the SW-NVR license, and that goes right to the master controller. So again, like Jeff said, if you have 3 controllers that you're going to be doing this on, 2 extenders and 1 primary controller, you're going to buy 3 licenses and put them all on the primary controller. And then once you do that, you're going to then attach a USB hard drive or solid state drive to each of the controllers. You're going to add the driver, either the onboard or extender NVR, as your system requires. And then you're going to assign the drive per, like you normally would, and then just simply add and assign the cameras as you would for any typical NVR. A couple other small things I'll touch on. This is after you do this, you would then assign the cameras, and this is the screen of how that looks like. This is also, you can see the settings is the drive that I'm using. And then a couple other things on the setup. So one is the record profile. That's important. So you can set the stream that you wish to record off the camera. And this is not only an Elan camera, but any OnVIF compatible camera that you use. In here as well, you will see the recording schedule. Again, the options are constant, which is always motion only. That's for Elan cameras only, since we know when it's motion coming in and coming out. Custom, now that is a schedule that is set in the viewer, so the end user can modify that schedule. So if I want my interior cameras to record only at night and not the day, or whatever you think might be good, you can do that, and that would be a custom option there. And then off, you don't want it to record at all. The next is clear channel data. So by checking that box, it will pretty much wipe that channel out and clear it out. And like they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So maybe you have 36 cameras like here, and this is how you would do it. You would have extender with a hard drive connected, and you can assign 8 cameras to it. And again, this is a 36 camera kind of ordeal. Now the size of the drives I randomly picked, just knowing how many cameras there were, but there could be much higher or much lower. That, again, up to you. All right. Now we'll kick it off to Jeff for some questions and answers.
Believe it or not, the chat log has been pretty quiet. Guys, if there's any questions on this portion, the NVR portion, type them in the chat log. Otherwise, Larry, it looks like we've done a good job explaining. While we'll give some time for questions to come in, this NVR solution, so a lot of, when we started this with the 4 channels on the primary controller, we had a lot of questions revolved around what USB drive to use, solid state versus, traditional spinning platter. I think we've kind of worked out all of those gotchas there, things that you need to know. Larry's point, the most important thing is on the extenders with a solid state drive. If you are going to use a solid state drive, you have to use, or we prefer you to use, a power USB hub. And we have recommended drives. We have recommended USB hubs in the integration notes. So it kind of gives you an area to start looking and what we've recommended and what we've tested. So we do have some questions coming through. Any particular reason why the main controller can't handle 8 channels? Well, Steven, the primary controller probably could, but we've throttled that back because that primary controller is also doing all of the AV, control. It's doing a lot more than just acting as an I/O host or OSD or doorbell, right? So it's resources. We wanted to cut that down to only 4 channels on the main controller.
And Jeff is right on the point with that. When it comes to the primary controller doing 4, these systems could get, as you guys know, quite large. And a primary controller can be doing hundreds of functions, and it could have hundreds of drivers. Well, I have hundreds of drivers, but it could have a lot of drivers that are requiring lots of memory and lots of CPU. 4 is a reserved amount. If we were to scale, it's hard to be able to say based on a system that we don't know. So 4 is safe for the primary controller, and that's why it is exactly what Jeff said.
Another question came through, are you getting rid of your NVRs? So you will start to see our hardware NVRs phase out. Yes, this is going to be our preferred method moving forward. So it's one license to rule them all, right? So again, like when we talked, the licenses aren't key to a Mac ID of any controller. So a license doesn't matter whether it's applied on the main controller doing 4 cameras or an extender controller doing 8. And you can even start with a license running on a master controller doing 4 cameras. But then if we want to expand that, and you can use that same license, if you remove the internal DVR and configure it for an external DVR, 8 channels on an extender, you can use that same license. And then the last question, so is it 1 software license per extender? Yes. It's 1 software license per extender, and you would also need one if you were to use the 4 cameras on the primary controller. I think what we're going to see adoption on this is the 4 channels on the main controller is great, in a small system, 4 cameras, kind of get a client started. We all know how surveillance works. You start off with 4 cameras. Back when I was a dealer, we'd start off with a couple of cameras, and lo and behold, end users living in with a couple months, however long, they want to add more cameras. So you're starting off with 4, then we can go to 8, use that same license, and kind of really support the expandability of the solution.
Oh, there was one question that came in. If you use the USB for the cameras, can you still use the Z-Wave antenna? Well, as you guys know, on the SC100, there is only one USB drive, but yes, you can absolutely use a USB hub, add more USBs, and that's totally doable. So on my SC100 extender, I have a hard drive and the Z-Wave antenna on it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I needed to scroll down. There's a couple more in there. The frames per second and bit rate affect the performance of controller or overall interface experience. No, it does not. And that's another one of the reasons is why we've only got it as 4 cameras on the primary controller. I can't hit home how efficient and how responsive the software-based solution is versus the hardware. So no, your frames per second and whatever bit rate you're at, and this, guys, this also works. This isn't just Elan cameras, right? This is an Onvis solution where third-party Onvis cameras are compatible with this. They'll record. The only downside is you only have 24/7 recording. You have constant recording. But if you guys remember in the last update, we added a feature where you did custom recording events. So even if you had a third-party camera and you wanted to trigger some events for it, If you use the trigger as, say, a door contact or a garage door, every time the garage door opens, that's my trigger. Now I can have a event timeline tick on the NVR on a third-party camera that would capture that garage camera for X amount of seconds every time that garage door is opened. One last question. Are we able to add 8 channels to the primary? No. Primary controller is capped at 4 channels, any way you look at it. I don't care if it's an SC100. I don't care if it's an SC300. It's 4 cameras only on that.
Correct.
I think we're good, Larry.
I think so too. All right. Next section, and this is probably one of my favorite sections, is the new lighting scheduler. Now, since I was a dealer, and I don't want to go back that far, geez, I've always thought that the lighting scheduler needed to be like the climate scheduler in a per day thing, and finally, it is. So right now, in this build, there are user-defined periods. So an end user can go and add the period, so it doesn't require a dealer to do it. We support up to 32 periods. Having more than 8 was a high request by day scheduling. So again, you can see on the top the days of the week and period time readout. So, if I have things set at sunrise or sunset, that changes every day. I kind of want to know when that is, and that we do actually read that out. Loads by area listing, load indication, and by light or scene. So those are all things that this new, the new scheduler does do. So let's take a look at it in detail. There's a bigger picture so you guys can see that. Now, again, when this releases, you guys will be able to use this, but let's take a look at some of the details. So scheduler by day. This is the largest feature request for the lighting scheduler, and it is here now. For each period, you can select what day it occurs on. So up there, you would click that box, and you'd get that center box there, and you would put the check next to which day of the week that you'd want that to happen. Next is, for that period, when do you want it to happen? So the usual times still occur. Clock, which is specific time, sunrise, plus or minus, or sunset, plus or minus. Now, you can see right there, it says sunrise, 5:21 a.m. So we put the time that it will actually occur, and that, again, changes daily, but I used to do math. I used to look at sunrise and look at when the sun would rise and kind of figure it out, but now we just do the work for you. Up on the top corner is the system modes. These work exactly the same way as they did before, so you can have different periods per home, away, and they work exactly the same. Manage periods. This is the gear button in the left-hand section of the screen. And again, this is end user facing, and when you click that, you get this menu here. Now, in here, you will get an option to create new, duplicate, or delete. And again, there could be up to 32 periods now. Duplicate is nice, and I'm going to tell you why. So being per day, and I don't know about you guys, but my weekends are different than my weekdays. The time is different, but what I want to occur is the same, just the times are different. So what I was doing is creating a new schedule, and you can see 7:15 and 8 o'clock in the morning. So I would create a schedule for 7:15, and then I'd recreate the entire schedule for 8 o'clock in the morning. Well, that seemed a little cumbersome to do that, especially for an end user. So why not duplicate, and then all I have to do is change the time. So that does help quite a bit, and I think end users will like that. So the periods, they're all on the left-hand side. There will be a scroll bar if you're past the screen size. Again, we could support up to 32 of those periods. Next is the available devices. This is also a little bit different than the lighting scheduler of the past. So these are organized by the areas that they're in. So our lighting areas, if you guys remember our lighting areas, so we schedule them together. So again, you can see here, I have right now I'm in the kitchen. All the kitchen loads are grouped together, and the areas are organized alphabetically. And if there are devices that aren't in an area, they will start after the areas end, and then they will be alphabetically as well. There are indications. So each device will have will indicate if it's a scene, which is a star icon, or a load, which is a bulb icon. And it'll say the area if it has one underneath the actual load. And then the devices in the scene are going to be listed in that larger pane to the right, where they can be deleted or set, so on, off, or the dim levels right then and there. All right, let's get to some questions. Jeffrey, to you.
Yeah, well, we get the questions rolling in. You guys, you probably noticed that, your normal end user here is more and more techy. So what we're trying to do, with each release is try to give a little bit more control to your end user. The ability to customize things, the ability to customize the UI, to set their own lighting scenes, to set their own lighting schedules. We're moving in where, traditionally 10 years ago, or back when the HCs or the SCs just came out, control platforms were more just for control, right? I think that the average end user may be getting younger, more technically advanced, and it's something that we need to give them. We need to give them a little bit more control over the system to create their own events and to personalize it as they see fit. The dimming level selectable down to 1% increments now.
Yeah, so before it was, I think, like 15 or 10 or 5. I forget what it is. I've been living in this so long.
I think it was 5.
Yeah, but now it's just a slide bar, so it's whatever the usual dim works and how that is. So that's the way it'll work. The standard dim lighting dimmer.
Yeah, I also think that it relayed your 5, 10, or what the increment was based on the load and the lighting system. So you say 10% on a couple, there was 5, but yeah, we're going into 1% increments now, just using a variable slider. I think that is it. Keep rolling.
All right, here we go. Now we'll talk about the new features. So I had mentioned this earlier, but now we'll talk about a little bit in detail, the NVR clip exporting or saving options. Saving a clip locally versus remotely have different options due to their connection speeds and what's allowed. So on a local connection, you can now export an NVR clip. Again, this is for the software NVR of 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and 1 hour. On a remote connection, you can export a NVR clip. Again, this is with the software NVR of 30 seconds, 1, 2, or 5 minutes. I have to say, it is suggested to be on a wired connection if on a PC or Mac, or locally if you're exporting a longer clip, just due to the size of the files. All right. New or a change to the local viewer registration. Now, this was an option that was introduced in 8.7. So if a new viewer was to be on a client's system, they would get an alert, and they'd have to allow the new registration or the new device to be able to access the system, which is a security thing and definitely a thing we need to do. But it required the PIN code to be entered in. So we have this this new option here, and then again, this is in the global interfaces section there, and it's underneath where the hide all zones button is and was. It's a new option there. It's a drop down, so you can now disable the PIN. It was constantly required before, but now you can disable it. So it'll still show up in the UI to an end user, and they'll have to accept it, but it won't now. If that's set to PIN disabled, it won't then pop up and make them enter their code.
Larry, let me touch on
I was waiting for
you. So the NVR clip, you guys know in our hardware solutions, we could go in and log into the NVR and pull what we needed using the backup main, the software, through the NVRs. So with the software, when we did this viewer export, we would get a ton of calls. We wanted it longer. It wouldn't be uncommon for dealers to do you'd have to manage 6 5-minute clips to get to 30 minutes. So this export thing is huge. And we've tested, to export an hour worth of recorded footage, you're going to be surprised at how fast it completes. Okay. So I emphasize you guys to play with that, get familiar with that and be comfortable with it, because again, this is how this is our stance moving forward, and this export feature is killer now up to the hour. And then let's talk about the local viewer registration. So when this launched, I know this is a sore topic with a lot of people, because as soon as this software build hit, myself and the RTX team, I'm sure we were getting tons of calls. This feature with disabling the password, you guys know it was the viewer, the settings passcode to get into the advanced settings, which did not sit well with very many dealers. Maybe you didn't want to have your end user have access to that. So now we've got it to where that can be disabled. There's no PIN code to do that. You guys just need to understand that to be compliant with our up-to-date security certs, this is something we needed to do with the local viewer registration. So this is something that is here to stay. It's not going away. We've made it a little bit easier now where we don't need the viewer settings passcode to authorize that, which inevitably would always result in a call to the dealer. What is this? Why is this popping up? What are these notifications? So that's another really cool feature or change that we made to that feature. Not as awesome as alphabeticalizing the icons in configurator or moving the climate schedule back to where it was for 10 years before we changed it, but important nonetheless. Go ahead, Larry.
Oh, no. All right. So more features. We've got some lighting updates that are different than the scheduler. Duplicate scene. So if you have a scene and you want to just duplicate that. So if I added a scene in my kitchen and I want to just do the same exact thing, just modify some loads around or some load dim levels around, I could do that. I could hit duplicate. I can rename it, and then I could just modify from there. This makes it a lot easier for end users to do this. Another thing is the custom lighting scenes that are created. From the flyout, they weren't actually allowed to, or they weren't actually populated there, so you can add them from the flyout. I'm a big flyout user guy with our own interfaces, and I think that's a very good thing to do. Management Cloud update. There is 2 updates here. One is support for multiple NVR licenses, SW-NVR. So you need to have the updated Management Cloud to be able to do this. And that is for the support of the new Extender NVR expansion. And Marketplace. There is now a new releases area. So this gets updated. It comes in batches. So whenever there's a driver update or new release coming in, I add them in and they go into Marketplace and they're all good. But it's hard to find ones that are added or new. Our marketing team does publish an e-blast for this, but now we have this new releases section, and I will add them to this section, so you can go there, check out the new releases section, and I think this will make it a lot easier to find new releases in Marketplace under Management Cloud. Now there is a way to rename stuff that's renameable without a rename click option. So there's a viewer inline text entry enhancement, and that is this right here. So this is a scene, and I could just rename it by clicking on the scene name and rename it. Before, it would be a solid line. I couldn't click on it to rename it. I have to click a button that said rename, and then it would switch the screen to the rename. I get the keyboard and all that stuff. So I think this is a little easier. It'll be this way going forward for most things or everything at some point. The PIN code has been renamed as well. So before, this was labeled as the door lock PIN code. But we do so much more with this now. We do things for utilities, things for surveillance that require this. And it is more of a user PIN code rather than a door lock PIN code. So it's now changed to user PIN code from door lock PIN code. And the video settings in the UI have been refreshed. You can see they've been refactored to make it a little easier for the end users to be able to set this up and change some settings. Now let's talk about, you guys know me, my favorite subject, drivers. There's been an update to the Leap driver. recently, there was a change to the Leap API that affected how buttons loaded on Discovery. So for keypads, we've made the change to do that, and that's in this beta. So if you ever had a Lutron Leap driver that no buttons loaded from the keypad templates, that is now resolved. If you have added a Mow and Flow Watershed Off, we were seeing that there were many times where people added more than one shutoff, but we only loaded in one shutoff. Typically, it was one per house, but a lot of people are using this in ways that we didn't expect. So we now updated this driver to handle multiple flow shutoff valves in a location. Samsung IP. So this had an issue specifically with SE2s and 10s. They would drop the authentication or they just wouldn't work properly. And it was only on the SE2 or 10, and it was with Samsung IP. That's been resolved in this new release coming out. And KNX, there's an update there for unsolicited feedback from the RGBW lighting devices. MusicCast update. This is a big one. As Yamaha uses the MusicCast API for all their AVRs going forward, we decided to update the MusicCast driver to support the AVRs in a much better way. So we support, I think it's most of the AVRs that are out there now, and it should be as future-proof as we can make it. Of course, we'll change it as they change it. A couple things we also did is the controls, the web GUI for things, settings on the screen. You can see there's a controls button now that will move the cursor around, so you can change the settings from the AVR settings from the settings GUI and the sound programs. So how we do this now is on the left-hand side in the sound program option box, there's a couple things that are always going to be there that are standard for most AVRs, and those are direct connections. And then there is a left and right to scroll through all the different options. Now, some of these AVRs have 30, 40 different fields, and we didn't want to list 30 or 40 things there. It's a little overwhelming. So we scroll through, but what you can do is underneath that, there's 6 storage spots. So you can store, for instance, 2-channel stereo by pressing and holding the empty slot button, and that would store that there so the end user can just store the 6 that they like the most. And I think that's a lot. And they could just easily recall the 6 favorites that they like. So a lot of changes to the MusicCast, and I think this is going to be very good for Yamaha in the future. Panamax update. Again, we did the updated driver for C3IP, so it is compatible with utilities. And we'll talk about that, the C3IP in just a second. We did have one fix for the outlets and banks that did not cycle correctly. I think it was CV1 related, if I recall correctly. LG, we did an update here. So the favorite apps didn't execute correctly. You had to go down and manually select the device. And some sources on some displays didn't actually switch. So we fixed that too, and that's all correct in this release. Third-party drivers. Again, there's constant updates and constant updates to the management cloud marketplace. And these were the drivers that were added, and there's again added, most weeks there's additions there. Here's the CERs. Now I won't go through all these. The one thing I will touch on is the one for the PC viewer with the Intel graphics chipset for the Iris chip. That there's been a change there for that. That wouldn't render any UI, so that's been refixed, as well as all these other items here. All right, let's pause for some questions.
On the Mow and Flow, when we started with that, each shutoff is deemed as a location within the Flow app. And to Larry's point, we were seeing people use more than one shutoff. What if we saw people using it in main residence, guest residences? I've even seen people put them on the water feed for a boiler, for a hot water boiler. So a lot more different applications that popped in. That's why we made that change. And Larry, correct me if I'm wrong. Now, even if the client has shutoffs in multiple locations, meaning geographical locations, imported with the Moen app, now we would be able to see them all within the ELAN system.
Yeah, we'll import everything that user ID and credentials offers us, and then it'll be up to the dealer to then make it viewable or not viewable for the controller. So yes, that is true.
Yeah, and basically, to emphasize a little more on that, so if the ELAN system is in their main residence, say it's in Chicago, right, and they have a winter home in Florida, that they also have a Moen shut off there attached to their user company Moen app. Even though they don't have an ELAN system at their house in Florida, we will be able to see that shut off at the house in Chicago. So that's a cool feature that was in there.
The C3IP. This is the new Panamax device. We haven't had a new Panamax CI device in a bit, besides the vertical strip. I think it was the last one. But this is a new device. It's a small device. Again, compatible with Blue Bolt, as you can see the network card there. It's got 3 individually controlled outlets. None of that bank stuff. Everything's individually controlled. The same protect or disconnect surge protection you would expect from Panamax, and the EMI RFI protection, the under-over voltage disconnect to protect your equipment in some emergency cases, power sequencing between the 3 individually controlled outlets, 12 amp capacity amongst all the device, integrated wall brackets, as you can tell right there, and it is already compatible with ELAN utilities. A couple other benefits there. You guys can read that if you want. And it's a bigger picture of the front and back. So it's got the grounding lug. That's important for Panamax connected devices. You can see the network and the network reset button. The typical on switch. And yeah, the 3 outlets right there. Available for pre-sale soon, guys. Now, remember, and this happens every release, this feature doesn't work on the iOS or Android phones. But remember, there's new viewers that are required for the 87500 to function correctly. It is available. It is in their respective stores, so be sure to update the viewers as you roll this out. And that is all.